Everybody sit now. Everybody sit now.
So, what is your favorite way to visualize life right now?
My favorite way to visualize life?
Yeah.
I would say in a quintessential, totally digital land that I've created in my own head.
Digital.
An inside my head digital world.
Have you ever done a VR, virtual reality?
Just once.
How was that?
Pretty amazing, actually. Like, I definitely was the type of guy that doing it the first time was like walking into the wall and stuff like that. Like, unable to stay in one spot, thinking that the area was actually real.
Oh, so you were fully immersed. What were your expectations before doing VR?
Um, I kind of, because I thought that the graphics wouldn't be that great. I didn't think it would trick my brain. So it was interesting to fall into the trap.
Yeah, the same with me. I my expectations are blown. I went into it going, "Oh, this is just a silly thing that people do." And do you remember Windows 95, where you have the Paint program,
Mm-hmm.
and you would just spend, you know, let's say hours, but at least 10 minutes, you know, scribbling a bunch of colors on this Paint program,
Mm-hmm.
and then doing that in VR.
Oh, you could do that in VR,
Uh huh.
and it was just like it was right there, real life art.
Yeah. Yeah. You could grab paint and it just floats in midair, and it glosses and everything. And you can look around at it. I made a whole winter wonderland. I made trees. I made, you know, all on Christmas. For 3 hours. 3 hours I was in VR creating a winter wonderland, and my niece and nephew were
That's
wondering
awesome.
where their uncle was.
I was in Italy walking the cobblestone streets, and it might be the closest I ever get to Italy. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
really? Yeah, I did that one too. That's pretty cool. You're literally there.
You feel like you're there. That might be the future of travel.
Well, that's one of the issues I find with travel is um, domain A, where we are, to domain B, and then somehow space and time between the two, or a link between the two. Is that's where you find most problems with transportation? You know, a lack of an energy source, or um, valuable commodities exchanged for valuable resource. So then if we could only just get rid of the link between A and B, and we just go straight to B, like
Mm-hmm.
we're doing right now,
Yeah.
uh, a lot of the problems in the world might change to other problems.
Yeah, right. It would exchange one problem for another, probably, but that
Well,
would be.
the reason why I asked how you visualize life right now was because I felt like that would be a good introduction to our topic. And I guess what you're saying is life is a virtual world, or life is a um let's try and find it. Life is a machine. Hmm. It's interesting because the internet's so limitless. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So having, I guess, your worldview is actually limitless.
Yeah. Well, it's
Yeah,
kind of it's a funny thing about imagination, right? Is like any of the creative artists out there, it's quite a leap to go from that picture that you have in your brain to actually realizing it in the real world. And I mean, it's kind of like when I was a kid in art class and my art teacher told me that I was a bad drawer, and that I wasn't an artist. That really got me because there was something in me that knew that I wanted to be able to latch on to what I see in my imagination and actually make that a reality.
right.
And well, just that whole feeling of the moment that any of us have been told that we're not good at anything, but like specifically, I think in creativity, if you're told like you are not creative or you're not an artist, like that hits you because we're all designed to be artists.
Right. You had a documentary. Do you want to shed some light on that documentary about dreams?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good example of, and kind of what I'm thinking of when I think of imagining like a digital version of the world or whatever, is that, for lack of better or lack of ability to sort of clearly say what that means, is more like just the world that you see in your imagination, right? Because in this documentary called Dream that we've done, is it's quite a probably one of the most satisfying things personally that I've done is in places of real extreme poverty. So, like for example, in some villages in sub-Saharan Africa, and the kids that are in school are in like a classroom with like 160 other kids. So like the whole learning environment is chaos, right? And you feel for the teachers because they like genuinely want to get these kids to learn something, but how do you get through to 160 kids at a time, right? And so one of the things that we did is just like quiet everything down, get everybody to close their eyes, and walk them through this visualization of like really opening up their imagination. And the way that we did that is say like, if you were alone with God in a place that makes you feel peace, makes you feel like really safe, and then God asks you if you could do anything with your life, what would you do? And he asks you this question, like all of a sudden it sparks your imagination. Like if I was with the person that created the universe and has all the power of the universe in his control, and he's with me asking me, what do you dream is possible? All of a sudden, like my ability to dream starts to like broaden, right? And so
I
that's
Yeah, I feel like to add on top of that is, what do you dream? Well, what do you desire?
yeah. Yeah, exactly. If you're in that place of knowing that your desires are possible, what is it that you would desire? And like not limiting what you would think of in that place. Like that's one of the big things we say is like don't limit it according to your own like built-in understanding, right?
And in a place of poverty, oh man, talk about paradigm shifting.
Mm.
It's asking somebody, what do you dream about? What do you desire? When you're living so fundamentally.
Mhm. And within that, you definitely get some. You get a mixed bag, right? Some that they can't get their imagination yet to turn in that way because there's different roadblocks to getting to that, even just like understanding that paradigm, like you're saying. But then there's others that actually take what you thought was a big paradigm and blow it further. So you'd be like, like maybe you have an assumption about what their dream would be, but then it's like they want to be the president and they want to like run the United Nations and like they have this whole thing that you never thought of.
What a mind blow.
Mm-hmm.
And talking about uh, just inspiration, right? Hope and inspiration. When somebody in a story that you're drawing, that you've painted for me, and how big their dreams are, you know, how inspiring this documentary is for people to see. It makes me want to share it to people I know could use some inspiration and hope right now.
Yeah, I think it gives a lot of hope. Like one of the things that really stood out is even before, like, that there's different phases the world goes through, and sometimes it feels more like things are positive or negative or crisis or not a crisis. But if you can dream when you're in crisis, that's a pretty big deal, right? Like if you can only dream when everything's going well for you, then for a good percentage of your life, you might not actually be very efficient. Like you might not be able to really go to the next level or like actually pursue something that is important to you. Um, or even have purpose or significance with your life. Because if every time that there's a crisis, you hit a roadblock, that's a problem, right? Like you need to be able to dream, and these kids in Africa are a great example of some of them face real extreme poverty, and yet given some support and some methods and coaching, they're able to dream really big, and they're able to take steps towards some of those ideas and dreams. And I think that's a pretty big lesson, like for me anyways, personally, right? Is like, what point in my life do I struggle with my own dreams, my own desires? And am I letting whatever's happening around me, my external atmosphere, like am I letting that be a roadblock, or am I going to dream in the midst of whatever I face, right?
Right. When I used to think about dreaming, you're blowing my mind right now. I used to think about boredom being a roadblock. You know what I mean? I used to think that uh, boredom was a opportunity to dream and to be creative. So you have two options, monotony or take the call to action and dream. And but what you're saying too is taking that to the further. You're taking that even further and saying that struggle in struggle you dream. And how could you possibly come up with that self-control and patience and all those things you need to be able to dream in the midst of a storm?
That's a great, I mean, to me, it's like, those are the dreamers that really inspire me, right? It's like you face impossible odds or impossible crisis, and yet you are still living the dream or showing us that we can still dream even when it's hard, right? I mean, that's why I actually love sharing this thing about trying to create a dream for your life, sharing that with people that are like, we've shared it with girls coming out of the sex industry in Thailand, we've shared it with orphans in Africa, and then we've shared it with like kind of people from all different walks of life and different ethnic backgrounds and everything, and different like wealth levels and the whole thing. But the ones that inspire me the most are by far the ones that dream in the midst of great struggle.
And the great stories are those of new beginnings, where the new beginning is being made, something shifts. If you want to look at it as paths, there's a new path that's taken. And my question to you is, what is the path that led you to writing this book you're writing?
The new book. It is a path that was not at all of my own making. It was a path where I was walking in one direction, and then while I was going, and this was actually in connection with this other dream documentary, it's kind of while we were working on that project, I had a team that I was taking to Tanzania, and I just literally started to ask God. I was like, God, what is a word that we're supposed to like understand for our team going out on this mission, right? Because we're going to try to run these creative arts camps and do these outreaches in Tanzania and stuff. And literally, like, God whispered into my ear the word breath. And so I was like, what does that mean, right? Like this single word of breath. And so I started researching, doing a little digging, and while I was looking into that, I was really drawn to the Genesis creation story. And that's a story in the Bible that's always really gripped me as an artist, because creativity is sort of mysteriously locked up into that story. And there's sort of like some amazing things about creativity in that story of Genesis, particularly Genesis 1 and 2. And so I was thinking about creativity and breath, because in Genesis 1, God creates the heavens and the earth, creates the whole universe as we know. And then Genesis 2, he actually takes the form of a man in the Garden of Eden, and he blows his breath onto the face of Adam. And to me, that's like the ultimate moment of creation, right? It's taking something that literally is dead and making it alive.
Mm-hmm.
So this word breath in the realm of creativity just really, really triggered my interest. And then taking that word, I started to do some research, and because I was looking at Genesis, I started looking at the Hebrew and trying to dig deeper into the words, right? And it was absolutely mind-blowing, like what this word breath actually meant. And so that took me on a whole journey to write this book.
I'm on the same page. It's so mind-blowing. So unpack it, that journey further, going into the etymology or the study of breath. What is breath? And you mentioned Hebrew.
Yeah, so in the Hebrew, there's this verse in the book of Genesis that says, the Lord God, which is translated in Hebrew as Yahweh or YHWH, which is this whole mystery into itself, which we could talk more about.
Mm-hmm.
It says that he breathes the breath of life onto Adam, and Adam really represents all of humanity, right? And so the Adam, who's essentially like our oldest ancestor, and he breathes the breath of life onto Adam, and Adam comes alive. And there's this very clear usage of the word breath is interchangeable with the word spirit. And so it actually comes from the Hebrew word ruach, which it means breath and it means spirit. So it's as if God, who is spirit, imparts breath or spirit to mankind. And in that breath, man comes alive. So the actual spirit that makes us alive as anyone that's, even to take it as far as if you've seen a corpse, the difference between us and a corpse is that there's no breath, there's no spirit in it. And so a living human being has the breath of life from God, the creator, and he has breathed his breath or his spirit onto humanity. And that just like totally blew my mind, because this breath spirit theme just works its way all the way through the Bible and all the way through life.
Yeah, I just realized right now that the metaphor, it's metaphors aren't just metaphors, but the beyond the words is breath is a life force. Without the life force, there's no life. The idea that breath revitalizes us, or it fills us, or if you look at a tree, it's an animating force that the wind, the breath animates through the trees. Like in other poetry in the Bible, talks about the life force.
Yes, and funny you should say life force, because in the Hebrew there's this word that, so the word breath of life comes from this word called neshama in Hebrew, and what it actually means is an impartation of the life force of God. So it's not just breath as we understand, like breathing. It's like part of his character and his image is in the breath.
Wow.
So when it says in the Bible that you are made in God's image, that is like actually more mind blowing if you think of an impartation of his life force is inside of you.
Oh, right. So let's rewind a second here. Do you know the word form of Adam, where that comes from?
Adama, meaning, in Hebrew it sounds like dirt.
Yeah, dirt people, earthlings, literally earthling. He's an earthling.
Yeah.
And the idea that I find that story so loving, that the hands and the very the loving nature of that scene of taking a clump of clay, let's say, and sculpting it into image, right, and then blowing a life force into it. And we have to at least mention that the author of this story was taking jabs at their Babylonian neighbor, that there were other creation myths at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not loving the way that their view of life. Life is brutal. Life is strict, and life is through violence and war.
Mm-hmm.
And here are these neighbors taking little jabs with their pen, saying that no, we believe that the ultimate God or the ultimate existence is, I don't know. And finish that sentence for me. What is the ultimate? What is God's mission?
I mean, to me, it's really clear. It's that God is love, right? And so it reorchestrates the entire narrative around God, who is in front of us, holding our face, breathing his life on us in love, right? Like he's actually giving us an impartation of his love and his life force just by making us alive.
Wow. So this is in the book.
This is in the book. So, and it's, we can go many different places with the different things in the book, but the thing that is so intriguing, which you've already alluded to, is that, so in the first chapter of Genesis, for anyone unfamiliar with the narrative, it's like God is it says the Spirit of God is hovering over the water. And it's kind of, so that word spirit is that word breath again, ruach. So it's like the ruach of God is his spirit or his breath, and it's like over the waters. And he creates the entire universe by his words and by his actions from this sort of faraway place. But in the second chapter of Genesis, he comes and changes his form and comes into a garden, into this intimate setting where he can actually be touching his creation. And that's where really the pinnacle, the crown of his entire creation, which is you and I, which is humanity, is made in a garden where his hands are actually in the mud, getting his hands dirty, right? And
yeah. Wow. Continue.
so he gets his hands dirty because there's something special and different and unique about humanity. And everything else is like a word and is created by his imagination, like we talked about, becoming his words, becoming real. But the humanity is formed with his hands in the mud. and he shapes and sculpts. And that's why I was so drawn to that when I got this word breath and thinking about creativity, is he in his ultimate form is depicted as a sculptor, as a creative artist, right? And as a creative artist, he's in there sculpting his perfect atom from the dirt. And even though God himself has formed it with his own hands, it's still not alive until he breathes on it, right? So the spirit and the breath is really, that's where his image, his likeness comes from.
Mm. You see it in these children who dream.
Absolutely. And it's so, like, you literally see in these places, like with these kids in Tanzania, like when you start to literally tell them you are made in the image of God, and then you start to give them a little bit of background of what that means and start to allow them to imagine themselves as being made in God's image and to being creative, and their actual countenance changes. Like some of them go from totally despondent to like they are alive, right? Because all of a sudden they start to understand who they are. And so it's like their identity and their purpose starts to come alive.
Mm-hmm. That's probably one of the greatest gifts to give somebody is a desire, a will to life, a will to dream. Wow. That's amazing. And so moving forward then, I guess we have to talk about execution then. Like, what's it looking like, this book? Is it coming together? I think you mentioned it's the first draft.
Yeah, so I just passed the second draft actually to a publisher editor, and she's been really helpful and really insightful, and is really enjoying the context and the concept. And so the hope and the plan is to get that sort of final edit done, and maybe make any initial or any final changes, and then get this thing out to the world.
Wow, a gift to the world, a dream.
Yeah.
And then in this one, a breath.
Yeah.
A voice. Oh, a voice. Oh, that's the Hebrew idea of nefesh, your throat. So not only do you have a dream, but you have to find a way to embody it, right? So by creating a soul, nefesh, right? Your soul, your vital system. You know, it's almost like in the story, God needed humanity to manifest his dream.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a crazy concept, right? As anyone that in any way considers himself a creative artist is, I mean, we kind of see that in like Walt Disney and these guys where they created a character and then it suddenly comes alive and it's like talking to them, you know, like that whole thing like of interacting with the art that you create. That's ultimately, because you can have all the ideas in the world, but if you can't see them, like you said, manifest into something of reality, then it's really just a thought in your head, right? But if you can translate a thought into a word, into a reality, or into a detail that gets put on a page, and then all of a sudden it comes alive. I mean, for anyone, whether you're an artist or not, that's kind of what we actually do, right? Like the engineer or the person designing and drawing and creating for a house, or an architect, whatever it is, like we're taking something that is essentially inside of us and trying to make it real and put it into the world, right?
And to carry on the mission of the source of that mission. You know what I'm saying? So you create something so that it carries on your mission, what your vision for the world is. And that's why usually human beings fail. Because to get back to that beautiful glimpse at the beginning, to carry on that love forward. So to be able to really connect into it, what you're doing is you're connecting back to the source and carrying that source forward and becoming a vessel for that.
Yeah.
So that's beautiful. I think this book's gonna be really great. I'm already a subscriber.
Sweet first pre-sale.
Yeah, exactly. What last thing too before we land the plane is Adamah and Ahava in Hebrew. Ahava is love. And how quick I think that's definitely a writing technique there.
Mm.
And I wrote a song called Down and Dirty. You were talking about getting your hands dirty and being creative, and God using his hands to lovingly create his mission for the world.
Yes.
And I think that we need to get our hands dirty and finish this book. Or if you're listening at home, anybody, get your hands dirty and dream.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Yeah, because ultimately you're gonna face crisis and roadblocks on the way to it. Like almost like the more connected to the source, like you said, I think the more roadblocks you might encounter. But if you will just persevere through that, like that's the ultimate, right? Is then you actually see it could be years, it could be months, it could be days, depends on what type of project or thought or idea it is, right? What kind of a dream it is, but it's worth seeing it through if it's a dream worth dreaming, right? Like, and I think that it definitely seems like, at least in this moment in history, like some people are in crisis, right? And we all face different roadblocks and crises, but if we can encourage each other to get those creative imaginations, get those dreams to move forward, help each other carry those dreams forward, right? Like it's ultimately, I think, where you find so much purpose and significance is when you take those, what seem intangible sometimes in your imagination, but then you start to work them out in reality,
That's the beautiful way to end the conversation. Moving forward, I look forward to our next conversation, Daniel.
Me too. Thanks, Des.
All right. Signing out. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
We can talk about love, talk about the future, talk about everything, anything, as long as I get through to ya. Everybody sit now, everybody sit now.